Respect is not something you demand, it's something you earn, moment by moment, decision by decision. And the truth is, it can vanish in seconds if you fall into habits that silently destroy the way people see you. I remember a time in my early journey when I thought being respected was about how loud I spoke, how much I knew, or how often I showed off my strengths. But I quickly learned respect doesn't work that way. I lost people's trust because I kept interrupting conversations, arriving late, and sometimes speaking harshly without realizing the damage it caused. It wasn't until a mentor pointed out these blind spots that I understood respect isn't stolen, it's surrendered through our own habits. That's when I decided to change. And today, I want to share with you 7 bad habits that can destroy your respect faster than you think, so you can avoid them and protect your dignity. Number 1. Interrupting others constantly. Respect is fragile, and one of the quickest ways to lose it without even realizing is by constantly interrupting others. Because when you interrupt, what you are really saying is not just, I want to talk, but what I have to say is more important than what you are saying. And that cuts deep into the invisible thread of dignity that ties human relationships together. I learned this lesson in a way that still humbles me today. Years ago, I was in a meeting with senior leaders in an organization, hungry to prove myself, eager to sound smart, and every time someone spoke, I found myself jumping in with my ideas, finishing their sentences, or redirecting the conversation back to me. And at first, I thought I was showing enthusiasm. I thought I was demonstrating confidence, but what I was actually showing was insecurity, impatience, and a lack of respect for the voices in the room. And I will never forget the look on my mentor's face when he pulled me aside afterward and said quietly, "Do you realize how much respect you lost in there today? People stopped listening to you, not because you had nothing valuable to say, but because you didn't let them finish what they had to say." And that moment stung because he was right. I had silenced people with my interruptions, and in doing so, I silenced the respect they once had for me. The truth is, when you interrupt, you kill connection, because real connection is built on listening, on patience, on the willingness to make someone else feel seen and heard. And when you rob people of that moment, you leave them feeling small, dismissed, and undervalued. And no one respects the person who makes them feel invisible. Because deep down, we all long for acknowledgement, for the dignity of finishing a thought without being cut off, and respect grows in that soil of acknowledgement. I remember once meeting a man of great influence, a leader whose presence commanded admiration, and I was struck not by how much he spoke, but by how deeply he listened. When you spoke to him, he leaned in, his eyes locked on you, and no matter how long your point took, he never interrupted, he never rushed. And by the time you were finished, you felt as though your words carried weight simply because he allowed them to breathe. And that made you respect him even more. Not because he demanded it, but because he gave it first, through the discipline of listening. And I realized that this is the secret of great leaders, great friends, and great human beings. They respect others enough to let them finish. Because every interruption is a statement of superiority, while every patient silence is a gesture of honor. Think about it. How many times have you been in a conversation, ready to share your heart, only to be cut off halfway through? And how did that make you feel? Frustrated, unimportant, maybe even angry? And did you respect that person more or less? Of course less, because respect cannot survive in an environment where voices are not valued. And so I had to train myself to pause, to breathe, to let people finish, even if I thought I already knew what they were going to say. Because sometimes the greatest respect you can give is not your clever response, but your patient silence, the willingness to hold space for someone else's words. And slowly, I noticed something remarkable. When I stopped interrupting, people began to lean toward me more. They began to respect my input more. And ironically, when I said less, my words carried more weight, because people no longer saw me as someone desperate to speak, but as someone disciplined enough to listen. And that is when I understood that respect isn't built in the volume of your voice, but in the depth of your ears. It's not about how fast you can reply, but how long you can honor silence, because silence communicates. Silence says, I respect you enough to give you the space to finish. And that is more powerful than any interruption ever could be. So, if you want to destroy respect quickly, keep interrupting, keep cutting people off, and you will notice how their eyes dim, how their voices fade, how the warmth disappears from their presence. But if you want to earn respect that lasts, discipline yourself to hold your tongue, to listen until the last word has fallen, and in that small act of patience, you will give people the gift of being heard, and in return, they will give you something even greater, their lasting respect. Number 2. Breaking promises and being unreliable. Respect is built on trust, and trust is built on keeping your word, which means that one of the fastest ways to destroy your respect is by breaking promises and being unreliable, because every time you give your word and fail to honor it, you chip away at the foundation that holds relationships together, and eventually, no matter how talented, charming, or skilled you are, people will stop believing in you if they cannot believe you. And I know this from a painful season in my life when I was juggling too many commitments, saying yes to everyone because I didn't want to disappoint anybody. And at first it seemed harmless. I would promise a friend I'd meet them for coffee, assure a colleague I'd finish a task by Friday, tell my family I'd call them back later that evening. But little by little, I started failing to follow through, rescheduling plans, missing deadlines, forgetting callbacks. And though I thought people would understand because I was busy, what I didn't see was the silent erosion of respect happening right before my eyes. One day, a close friend looked me in the eyes and said, "I can't count on you anymore." And those words pierced me deeper than any insult, because they came not from anger but from disappointment. And disappointment is the graveyard where respect goes to die. And I realized in that moment that every broken promise, no matter how small, sends a message. You don't matter enough for me to keep my word. And that message lingers long after the excuse is forgotten, because human beings remember not what you promised but what you delivered. And respect thrives only when your actions consistently match your words. I once read about a business leader who was revered by his employees. Not because he was perfect, not because he always had the right answers, but because if he said he would do something, you could bet your life it would get done. And that reliability created a culture of trust, where people felt safe, valued, and respected. And I contrast that with another man I knew, brilliant on paper, gifted with ideas, but infamous for saying he'd follow up and never doing it, for promising meetings and canceling last minute, for raising expectations he never intended to meet. And though his intelligence was undeniable, he was quietly stripped of respect because people eventually saw his words as empty currency. Respect is not about how many promises you make, it's about how many promises you keep. And sometimes that means saying no upfront, so your yes carries weight, because an honest no builds more respect than a fake yes that ends in failure. And I had to learn this the hard way. I began practicing the discipline of under-promising and over-delivering, of committing to less but executing with excellence. And slowly, the cracks I had caused in my relationships began to heal, because reliability is like glue, it binds trust back together, and people began to respect me again, not because I was flawless, but because I became dependable, the kind of person who, when I said, "I'll be there," would actually show up. The truth is, breaking promises isn't just about disappointing others, it's about damaging your own character, because every time you fail to keep your word, you also hear that failure echo inside yourself, and slowly you stop respecting yourself. And when self-respect is gone, how can you expect others to respect you? Respect begins with integrity, with the alignment between your lips and your life, between your commitments and your follow-through. And if you want people to see you as someone worthy of trust, stop scattering careless promises and start honoring the ones you make. Because at the end of the day, people don't admire the person who promises the world but delivers excuses. They admire the person who promises little but delivers faithfully, because reliability is the real currency of respect. And once you understand this, you will never again waste your words. For you'll know that every promise is not just a statement, it is a contract of respect. Number 3, talking too much, listening too little. One of the most subtle but destructive habits that erodes respect is talking too much and listening too little. Because when you dominate a conversation, you may think you're impressing people with your knowledge, your humor, or your stories. But in reality, what you are often communicating is arrogance, insecurity, and a lack of care for the voices around you. And nothing dissolves respect faster than making others feel unheard. I once knew a man who was brilliant, highly educated, and always full of opinions. But every time we sat with him, it became clear that he wasn't interested in dialogue, he was only interested in a monologue, his monologue. And while at first you admired his energy and his passion, Over time, you found yourself dreading conversations with him, because there was no space for you to exist, no space for your words to breathe, and eventually, people began to avoid him, not because of what he said, but because of what he refused to hear, and this taught me something profound. Respect is not earned by how much you say, but by how deeply you listen. I remember a moment in my own life that changed me forever. Years ago, I was eager to impress a group of people I admired, so I kept jumping into conversations, adding comments, telling stories, filling every silence with my voice, thinking I was making an impact. But later that evening, someone gently told me, "You talk a lot, but you don't listen." And at first I felt offended, defensive even, but as I reflected, I realized they were right, and it hit me that the most respected people I looked up to weren't the ones who always had the most to say, but the ones who made others feel valued by how they listened. I once sat with a leader I deeply admired, and what struck me wasn't the brilliance of his words, but the depth of his silence. He leaned in, nodded thoughtfully, and when I spoke, I felt as though I was the only person in the world who mattered, and by the time I left, I respected him more than anyone else in that room, not because he dazzled me with his voice, but because he dignified me with his ears. And that is the secret of influence. People may not remember everything you say, but they will never forget how you made them feel when they spoke to you. Talking too much creates noise, but listening creates respect, because listening is love in action, listening is honor made visible, and listening is the bridge that tells people, "You matter enough for me to stop and give you space." When we talk endlessly, we risk sending the message that others' thoughts don't matter, and over time, that destroys the very foundation of respect, because human beings crave acknowledgement more than agreement. And if you rob them of that acknowledgement, they withdraw, they shut down, and they stop respecting you, because respect is reciprocal. You cannot expect to be heard if you refuse to hear others. I learned to discipline myself in conversations by practicing intentional silence, by asking questions instead of giving speeches, by waiting a few seconds after someone finished before I responded, and I was amazed at how relationships shifted. People began to share more deeply with me. They began to trust me with their stories, and their respect grew. Not because I suddenly became wiser, but because I became quieter. The truth is, people respect those who make them feel important, and the quickest way to do that is not to talk more, but to listen more. Because silence is not weakness, it is strength, it is restraint. It is the power to place value on another person's words, and that kind of power builds respect far faster than the loudest voice ever could. So, if you want to lose respect, keep filling every silence with your noise. But if you want to earn it, master the art of listening, because when you listen, you don't just hear words, you hear hearts, and in that space, respect is born, and respect endures. Number 4. Disrespecting boundaries. Disrespecting boundaries is one of the most silent but deadly ways to lose respect. Because when you cross the invisible lines that protect another person's time, space, emotions, or values, you send a clear message. My needs matter more than yours. And that mindset instantly diminishes the way people see you, for respect cannot survive where boundaries are ignored. I learned this lesson when I was younger, full of energy and ambition, always wanting to be involved in people's lives, constantly calling, dropping by unannounced, expecting their time and attention whenever I wanted. And for a while, people tolerated it because they cared for me. But slowly, I noticed their enthusiasm fading, their responses growing shorter, their doors opening less often, until one day a close friend looked me straight in the eye and said, "I feel drained around you, because you never respect my space." And though the words hurt, they carried a truth. I could not deny I was exhausting people, not because I meant harm, but because I didn't honor their boundaries, and in doing so, I eroded their respect. It hit me then that boundaries are not walls built to shut you out, they are fences built to protect what's valuable inside. And when you trample over those fences, you don't just invade someone's life, you damage the trust that keeps respect alive. Because people feel safe with those who respect limits, and unsafe with those who disregard them. I once worked with a leader who was brilliant at strategy, but terrible at respecting boundaries. He sent messages at midnight and expected immediate replies, demanded people sacrifice family time for work without notice, and constantly pushed past what was reasonable. And though his authority forced compliance, deep down nobody respected him, they only feared him, and fear is never the same as respect. In contrast, I knew another leader who always asked, Is now a good time? Do you have the capacity for this? And he respected when people said no, and ironically, because he honored boundaries, people went the extra mile for him, not out of fear, but out of genuine respect. Because respect flows naturally where freedom is honored. I began to practice this lesson in my own life, waiting before calling someone, asking before giving advice, understanding that a no does not mean rejection but self-care. And I saw how relationships deepened, how people trusted me more, how they looked forward to being around me. Because respect thrives in the soil of boundaries. I also realized that disrespecting boundaries doesn't only apply to others, it applies to yourself too. If you allow people to walk all over your time, invade your peace, or treat you like you don't matter, you are teaching them how to disrespect you, because self-respect and respect from others are intertwined, and the boundaries you set for yourself create the standard for how others treat you. I remember a time when I used to answer every call, agree to every request, sacrifice my own rest to please everyone. And at first, people praised me for being so available, but over time they began to take me for granted, and worse, I began to lose respect for myself, because I realized I was allowing others to write the script of my life, and it wasn't until I started setting boundaries, saying no when I needed to, protecting my mornings for personal growth, carving out time for rest, that people began respecting me more, not less, because boundaries don't push people away. They teach people where respect begins. The truth is, when you ignore boundaries, you may gain temporary access, but you lose long-term respect. And respect, once lost, is not easily regained. But when you honor boundaries, you prove to people that you see them as whole human beings, not just tools for your convenience. And in return, they see you as someone worthy of trust, worthy of space, and worthy of respect. So, if you want to preserve the dignity of your relationships, learn to see boundaries not as restrictions, but as sacred agreements, because in honoring them, you protect both the relationship and the respect that keeps it alive. Number 5. Gossiping and talking behind backs. Gossiping and talking behind people's backs is one of the fastest ways to destroy your respect, because no matter how charming your words are to someone's face, the moment others discover that your tongue is double-edged, your credibility collapses. For people may laugh with you while you gossip, but deep down, they are thinking, if they can talk about others like this, one day they'll talk about me too. And that thought plants a seed of mistrust that grows into a wall of disrespect. I learned this lesson years ago, when I worked in an environment where gossip was the culture every lunch break. The group I hung around would dissect someone's choices, mock someone's mistakes, or speculate about someone's private life. And at first, I joined in, because it felt harmless. It even felt like bonding. But one day, word got back that I had repeated something about a colleague's personal struggle, and though I hadn't meant harm, the damage was done. Her eyes, once warm with trust, turned cold. Her conversations with me became guarded, and I realized in that moment that gossip doesn't just harm the subject, it stains the speaker, because while I thought I was being accepted by joining the gossip, what I really did was destroy the respect that gave my words weight. I will never forget the day I sat down with a mentor who told me bluntly, if people can't trust your mouth when they're not around, they'll never respect your presence when they are. And those words reshaped the way I saw communication forever. True respect is built in the silence of loyalty, when you protect someone's name in their absence, when you defend them instead of dismantling them, when you refuse to spread what isn't yours to spread. That is when people begin to see you as trustworthy, and trust is the heartbeat of respect. I once knew a woman in a company who was admired by all, not because she was the most skilled, but because everyone knew that no matter what was said in her presence, it stayed there. She was a vault, and that confidentiality made people feel safe, and safety breeds respect. In contrast, there was another man, witty and sharp, but infamous for carrying stories from one group to another. And though people entertained him for his humor, no one truly respected him. No one truly let him close, because his tongue was a weapon that cut friendships in half and carved holes in trust. I had to learn to discipline myself, to catch my words before they left my lips, to ask myself, if the person I'm talking about were here, would I still say this? And if the answer was no, I learned to keep silent, because silence is stronger than betrayal, and integrity is louder than gossip. What's more, I discovered that gossip doesn't just destroy others, it corrodes your own spirit, because when you constantly magnify the flaws of others, you begin to shrink your own greatness. feeding your mind with negativity that keeps you small. But when you lift people up, even when they're not around, your own spirit grows, and people respect you because you become the kind of person who makes others feel safe. I remember years later when someone shared a painful secret with me and said, "I'm telling you because I know you won't repeat it." And in that moment, I realized how far I had come from being someone who casually repeated things to someone trusted with the weight of people's hearts, and that respect was worth more than any shallow approval gossip had ever given me. The truth is, gossip is cheap currency. It buys you moments of attention, but costs you years of respect, and once your tongue is known as untrustworthy, your reputation carries scars that are hard to erase. So if you want to destroy your respect, keep gossiping, keep feeding the fire of rumor and whispers. But if you want to be respected, choose loyalty, choose silence, choose to speak life instead of poison. Because people may not always tell you, but they are watching. And when they see you as someone who guards others in their absence, they will reward you with something gossip could never give: enduring respect. Number 6. Reacting with anger and disrespect. Reacting with anger and disrespect is one of the most destructive habits that can shatter your respect in an instant, because no matter how intelligent, talented, or accomplished you are, the moment you lose control of your temper and lash out at others, people stop seeing your strength and start seeing your weakness. And I know this truth from a painful moment in my own journey. When I was working under intense pressure, deadlines were tight, expectations were high, and during one heated meeting, I allowed my frustration to get the best of me. I raised my voice, dismissed someone's idea harshly, and left the room thinking I had asserted my authority. But when I looked into the faces of my colleagues afterward, I didn't see respect. I saw fear, silence, and disappointment. And later, a trusted coworker told me quietly, "We expected better from you." And those words cut me deeper than any confrontation could, because it revealed what I had failed to see. Anger doesn't command respect, it destroys it. And as I reflected, I realized that real strength is not in the power to dominate a room with volume, but in the discipline to stay calm under fire, because anyone can explode, but few can remain steady when emotions flare. I once read about a great leader who faced a public crisis, accused unfairly, insulted openly, and yet, instead of shouting or striking back, he paused, listened, and responded with measured words. And people said later, "We didn't respect him because he was right, we respected him because he was calm." And that image stayed with me, because it showed me that anger may feel powerful in the moment, but calmness earns respect that lasts long after the moment has passed. I remember another time in my own life when someone attacked me verbally, pushing every button I had, and though every part of me wanted to fire back with equal force, I chose instead to breathe, to stay quiet until my emotions cooled. And later, when I finally responded, I spoke with clarity and dignity, and the outcome shocked me. The very person who had tried to provoke me ended up apologizing, and others who witnessed it came to me afterward and said, "I respect how you handled that." And it hit me that people aren't impressed when you lose control, they are impressed when you master it. Because self-control is the highest form of strength. Anger, on the other hand, is like fire: it burns fast, feels hot, but leaves ashes in its wake, and the ashes are always your reputation, your relationships, and your respect. Think about it. How many times have you seen someone lose their temper, maybe a teacher, a boss, or even a parent, and while you may have obeyed them, in that moment, deep inside, your respect for them diminished? Because respect cannot coexist with fear, and once someone disrespects others in anger, their authority is stained. I had to train myself to pause before responding, to count, to breathe, to step away, if needed. Because the seconds you spend calming yourself can save years of repairing broken trust. And what I found is that when I stopped reacting with anger, people leaned in closer. They opened up more. They respected my words, not because they were louder, but because they carried the weight of calmness. And calmness is always respected more than chaos. The truth is, disrespect is not just in shouting, it's in the tone of your words, the roll of your eyes, the sarcasm you drip, and every little act of disrespect diminishes you more than the person you aim it at. Because when you treat others small, you make yourself smaller. So if you want to keep your respect intact, discipline your emotions, learn to master the pause. Because, in that pause, lies the difference between regret and respect. Between destroying relationships and deepening them, between being remembered as someone feared or someone admired. And I promise you this: the world does not respect the person who cannot control their anger, but it will always respect the one who remains calm, steady, and dignified, no matter the storm raging around them. Number 7. Neglecting self-respect. Neglecting self-respect is perhaps the most silent, but the most devastating way to lose the respect of others, because how you treat yourself sets the tone for how the world treats you. And if you don't value your own dignity, why should anyone else? I learned this lesson during a time in my life when I thought respect came only from pleasing others, from always saying yes, from sacrificing my own needs just to earn approval. And at first, people praised me for being so kind and so available, but slowly I realized the darker truth. The more I neglected myself, the more others began to take me for granted, canceling on me without apology, demanding more of me without gratitude. And the more I allowed it, the less respect I had left, not just from them, but from myself. Because every time you compromise your own dignity for the sake of acceptance, you are teaching others that you are willing to live without respect. I remember a powerful turning point when someone I admired told me bluntly, "People will only treat you the way you allow them to," and that sentence became a mirror that forced me to see that I was the one training people to disrespect me by disrespecting myself, by tolerating lateness, by letting my boundaries be crossed, by not standing up for what I believed in, and most of all, by not holding myself accountable to the standards I admired in others. I realized that self-respect isn't about arrogance or pride. It's about alignment, living in such a way that your actions, your words, and your values match. Because when you betray yourself, others see it, and they mirror it back to you. I once worked with a man who was incredibly gifted, but he constantly belittled himself, laughed at his own worth, downplayed his achievements, and accepted treatment far beneath his value. And over time, people began to agree with the low image he carried of himself, not because he wasn't capable, but because he broadcasted with his life that he didn't believe in his own worth, and respect faded accordingly. In contrast, I once met a woman who carried herself with quiet dignity. She wasn't loud, she wasn't flashy, but she knew her worth. She spoke with clarity, she set clear boundaries, she didn't tolerate disrespect, and because she respected herself, everyone around her respected her too, even those who disagreed with her.